Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm so glad you're here. If you are new to this channel and you are interested in being part of the solution to our education crisis in America, I hope you will subscribe to be notified when I make more new content for the channel. If you're not already a subscriber, please also do like and share this broadcast. We are live. If you're watching on the replay, thank you for joining us, but I'm introing it as a live broadcast. And I want everyone to benefit from the information we're about to present and be able to ask questions as we present it if they are able to. Each of these shows is an opportunity to hear from people who are working to improve education in America any way they can, and this one is no exception. I'm so excited for this guest. I've been wanting to bring her here to the channel for so long, and our schedules have just not aligned. And finally, the stars have aligned, the calendar is aligned, and I'm so excited. Pamela Garfield-Jaeger has worked in, she's worked as an LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker, for over 20 years in a variety of settings. She even worked in school counseling. She worked with teens in school and outpatient settings. And she realizes that the vast majority of parents are not really prepared to engage the mental health system from a position of knowledge and understanding. So she has agreed to come here to join me on this channel to help educate you if you're a parent or you're just an interested party, and what to expect when you do interact with this complicated system, and also to educate you about what is going on in mental health today in general, and in particular, specifically in the school setting and with children, minor children, 18 years of age and younger. She takes particular interest in that, and I am so excited to pick her brain. Please have questions ready. Please share the broadcast with others. And without further ado, let's welcome Pamela. Hi, Pam. How are you?
Hi.
So excited. Okay. So you're out there in California, right?
I am. I'm in California.
Right.
Yeah. Fortunately and
Now,
unfortunately.
fortunately, well, it's beautiful. We can see that. Tell the audience a little bit about your background and, your experience, but also like what brought you to the point you're at right now and you're thinking about psychology and, mental health.
Yeah. My experience is pretty vast. I mean, I started off in the late 90s as an innocent little social worker, wanted to change the world and help people, just like most of us start out, naive, young, wide-eyed, and bushy-tailed. I quickly learned that, things weren't that simple and easy, even in the very beginning, working in New York City, I actually worked in inner city schools in Brooklyn and the Bronx and in Harlem, and quickly learned how difficult it is to change the world. I mean, I think I did some good work, but I learned lots of things right out of the gate. But after that, I moved to California and started working with foster youth and group homes. And then got my California state license and became a clinical supervisor, mostly in schools in the Bay Area of California. And I did that for over 10 years. And then, I've done other things. I've also worked at outpatient clinics. I've worked a lot with teens and families, but I have also worked with adults. I usually end up with the young adults because the other therapists don't want to work with the young people because for some people that's a harder population. For me, I tend to, connect with them and do well with them. I work with like severely mental ill and programs that are called IOP and PHP, and that stands for Partial Hospitalization Program and Individualized Outpatient Program. Those are programs for people who usually have been hospitalized for some severe mental health issue like a suicide attempt, and they're now being discharged from the hospital, and then they're in a group therapy program, usually for about 6 to 8 weeks. It depends on the situation. So I worked in those sorts of programs also. So that's my main bulk of experience.
Right. So because you have so much experience working with young people, you must look at, in this field, you must look at what's going on today in schools with the focus on mental health, through that. You're coming to it with sort of more knowledge about what those kids need and, having been at it longer than maybe somebody who started today. And certainly than parents, it's such a big topic. I don't even know where to start, but let me ask you, like, would you be willing to be a school counselor in today's schools doing what they're doing? Would you do it?
No way, Jose. No. Things have changed so much. So when I was talking about working in the schools, the last time I worked as a clinical director at a school was in 2016. I think our world, our country was very different at that time. I I hit some serious challenges there, but the challenges then are very different than they are today. And I think the values and what therapists are being taught are in such a short time have really shifted. So I don't think I'd last a day in a school nowadays. I mean, just the masking alone and people encouraging that was enough for me to have a meltdown to just work when I most recently was working at this IOP program for teens, and they're very still much encouraging it in schools. Um, I mean, I personally just think it's clinically not indicated. I mean, we know they don't work, but then just as a mental health person, I think it's like extra damaging. So all of these factors that I don't think I could do it. It's funny, as you asked me this, I'm just remembering I just got in my email and inbox, like I'm still, I guess, on some lists where I'm getting recruited for jobs. I guess they don't know I'm, deplorable now. and and
Like, you
and on
don't want me.
I know, I'm like, I don't know if you know, like, I'm not what you think I am.
Right.
But on that, it said like support social emotional learning. I mean, I forgot all the things it said, but I remember that was the first bullet point, that I'd be teaching workshops on social emotional learning, things that were not ever in a job description I've ever gotten in the past. So they're really pushing this stuff hardcore, and I know it would just eat me up inside. I couldn't do it, especially at the level I'm at, because I'd be a clinical supervisor most likely. So I couldn't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's dig into it a little bit, because obviously now that you've said I couldn't do it, I wouldn't do it, I'm sure the audience is going, why? Like, give us specifics as to why you would not do it.
Do we have
So
3 hours? I mean, we could go
I
on.
know, right? So what okay, let's start with the masks, because that was one of the original things. I know you mentioned that you had to stop doing what you were doing because you simply refused the vaccine mandate, right? That's
Yeah.
one of the things that the audience may not know, is that you refused to participate in the vaccine mandate, and that meant, bye-bye job, basically,
Yeah. I
right?
was considered a California healthcare worker. So I was one of those healthcare workers that lost my job because I chose not to get the COVID vaccine. Um, I don't want to get you taken off YouTube here, but that was my personal choice. I had actually just come back from several years of personal health issues, and I was finally doing better. This was supposedly my big comeback. I was working at a job, honestly, I was overqualified for, but I was just happy to be there because I had honestly been bedridden for a few years before that.
Sure, sure.
And I had already recovered from the virus, so I knew I didn't need it. I also observed my husband actually have a really bad reaction to it. So the combination, all of that, just led me to the final decision that I wasn't going to do it. And a part time job after being on disability wasn't worth that. So I let it go. I felt honestly very lucky that it was easier for me to make that decision. I had less at stake that I know a lot of other people had. So I was able to do that. And that was really what emboldened me to step up. And I felt like I was sort of being called to start talking about all these things that I'm seeing, all the things that you and I have talked about offline and online. So that's how I landed here.
Well, let's now go to the masking of children, young adults, whatever. You mentioned in the intro, you said that was just not clinically, it's not clinically indicated for thing, right? We don't want to get in
Right.
trouble.
So I know.
But
Oops.
at the same time, that's our opinion. Uh, Psychologically, what does it do to a we can talk about people in general, but let's talk about particularly children of school age. I mean, we could spend a whole day and a whole show on preschool and little babies, but we're talking about K-12 here, even on into college. Let's even go that far, okay? Because that's a big transition, right? We're living at home and now you're probably living away from home. So, what does it do to the social and emotional skills of a person to do this?
Yeah, so much damage. I mean,
Tell
we
us.
could go on. Kids already, I think, in the society with all of the screens and all of the overly structured lifestyles that they have already struggle socially. Now what we've done is we've taken away their ability to express and read social cues.
Right.
For here in California, it was 2 years plus where they were doing that, and those were really pivotal years for these children who are developing. So,
Right.
in terms of their some social emotional development, it had detrimental effects on being able to just simply relate to fellow human beings.
Right.
Um, then there was the divide, the social divide, where there were kids that were doing it because they felt they had to, because they were worried about being, fitting in. And then there were some of those kids who were rebelling against it. Unfortunately, not as many as I would have hoped, honestly, here in California, but there were some. But that caused, I mean, think about what if we could all reflect on what it was like to be a child and try to figure out where you fit in. Now you have whether you can talk to somebody that's wearing a mask or not wearing a mask is part of the equation. I mean, that especially for teenagers in high school, I still honestly can't imagine what it would be like. You probably have a better idea having teenagers in your house and having to live through that a lot more. Um,
Right.
but just yeah, socially that way. For those with mental health issues, especially, this is where it was really bothering me because I was working in this IOP PHP program, those group therapy programs, where I was
Sure.
working with both adults and teens with severe mental illness. Those who have schizophrenia, those who have bipolar disorder, those who have severe social anxiety, people who see and hear voices. I mean, we're talking about severe mental illness. We're not just talking about
Oh
people who are
my
stressed out,
god.
and they're all being forced to mask. They're all observing the staff wiping everything down around them because the virus. And I mean, so we're talking about people with OCD and all these other things, and we the staff are encouraging, I think, mental illness.
Right.
So it was really hard to be in that environment. You think someone with trauma, what's the coping skill? Most people have trauma when they're stressed out, they're having a panic attack. It's
Yeah.
breathing. Breathing.
Exac
You need to take a deep breath. How do we calm ourselves down usually? By breathing. If we don't
Oh
have
my
that as a coping
god.
skill, you've taken that away from someone who gets actual panic attacks. We're talking real panic attacks, not, oh, I'm a little nervous right now. That's really detrimental for that person. And then what was very strange, leading a group wearing a mask was a very strange experience where here I was a per diem, meaning I was just coming in twice a week, filling in. So I didn't have the same amount of contact with the clients. So I had to really form a rapport with these people who were struggling and needed to trust me. They're here talking about very vulnerable things. They can't even see my face. They can't even see that I'm smiling at them. They can't see that I'm, showing empathy. They can see my eyes, but that's not enough. I mean, they need to be able to
No.
see my face. And I remember when Gavin Newsom, right before his recall, it was June before his recall, he lifted the mask mandates in California. They didn't lift them in the setting I was working in, but as a therapist, I rebelled a little bit and I just said, hey guys, like, let's take down the masks and see what each other look like. You should have
Sure.
seen how anxious all of the clients were, adults and kids, but the kids were, it was harder for the children to,
Mhm.
to
Sure.
just show their faces. They were like, I feel really vulnerable. I feel naked. Um, what a strange world we're in the United States of America, that children don't feel comfortable showing their own face. I mean, they haven't shown their face in a couple of years. Their faces have changed. Maybe they have more acne. They don't like their nose. They don't like their teeth. I mean, they're used to being able to hide. They're used to being able to yawn behind that mask. They're used to be able to make faces behind that mask. And now we're actually encouraging kids to wear these masks, figuratively and in reality. This is just all of this is just really bad for the mental health of our society. That's really how I saw it. It killed me. Like my heart. I would cry sometimes when I'd see children just out on the street wearing masks, but it was really hard at work.
Right. Now, there's a second component to that, which is that the messaging was very clear and it was constant. Do this for others.
Yeah.
So, I mean, children had to have picked up after a while on that their friends weren't, getting sent to hospital. You know what I'm saying? And they certainly weren't falling down dead. And I don't mean to be morbid, but it just wasn't affecting children. And children who went, especially in a situation where they sense the adults are very anxious and stressed out, and they sense there's a crisis. Look, we were locked down; they couldn't go anywhere. When you are in a subservient position, whether a child or even an adult in a subservient position, you become hyper sensitive to these kinds of things and hyper aware of small changes in your environment. So I guarantee you, they knew they were not at risk of really getting it. I mean, there might have been some neurotic, I mean, no offense, but there might have been some people who were hypochondriacal, whatever. But most kids
usually
knew
wasn't about that.
it wasn't about that. They knew that. So then the messaging was, you got to pull it on, pull it up, put your mask on because others, because grandma, because the teacher, and the teachers, of course, that was the public messaging. You want us to die.
I know.
When
Couldn't
the
believe
request was open the school. So now the kids are getting messaging from the school officials, the teachers union, and people say the kids aren't matching with the teachers union. Really? You don't think so? You don't think kids go on the internet when they're cooped up at home? Kids are paying attention to what they're saying on Instagram and so forth. There were so many, how many TikTok teachers were there? How many dancing nurses were there? They were not missing the message from the grown-ups that if you don't do X, you want us to die, or you're going to kill us, you're going to make us sick. And it's really selfish of you. Okay. Selfish. You're a bad person if, right? It's not like, so now it's becomes not just, I don't know how to show my face to people when I'm, a preteen or, like I'm changing rapidly, but I've got this message that this isn't for my protection. It used to be so clear in society. Adults protect children. The role of adults is to serve as protectors. If we're going to throw our bodies in front of our kids to protect them from something, we're going to do it. And now it's like, put a mask on to save me. And it's like, whoa. Stop, hold the presses. This shocked me. I'm a layperson. I'm not a social worker. I am not a therapist of any kind. And that messaging, when I saw it and heard it for the very first time, I thought to myself, how dare you abuse millions of children simultaneously? So I'm not crazy, right? I'm not like just imagining that.
Actually, I was one of my earlier Instagram reels when I was starting out with this whole public persona. I actually did this little reel that says, when did it become the role of children to take care of adults? That's actually exactly what I said. It was in response to a teacher who was coming out as trans or something, but it's really the same idea. And on all of these topics, all of a sudden we're creating all these little codependent little children that the children are supposed to take care of the feelings of adults, to validate adults, to make the adults feel safe, or even the way they're pitting them against each other, making you feel safe with your peers in a way that's just not, it's about imaginary things. And so it's really unhealthy for these children. And yeah, I think our society is so backwards because of all of it.
And it really became not only normalized, but institutionalized. Institutionalized to the point where it then became, it seems to me, the justification for things that are the root of my next question, which is, so we've talked about how the masks and all this kind of like seems to have laid the foundation for the flip-flop in the roles. And now we enter the phase of where there's social emotional learning programs being put into school. There's this sudden, it feels sudden to me, although I know SEL has been in schools for much longer, but the push, the like everyone has to do this all the time in school wide in every class seems more sudden. And as a parent, as a teacher myself, not in the classroom, but still, one of the things that came to my mind was, what is the impetus? Yes, okay, we are aware that there are kids who really are struggling from this, and why wouldn't they be? So to me, it was obvious why they are. We were locked down. They didn't get to go to school and see their friends. They missed out on any kind of learning, so they kind of know they're not competent for their age in academic subjects. They missed their sports. They missed just normalcy. Their parents were strung out, and everybody was cooped up together in the house where they're not usually. It's not like a normal togetherness thing. It was like we're all stressed out. So there are all these very obvious reasons, none of which really reside permanently in the home. In other words, it's not endemic. It's not they're all suddenly abused by their parents. Like it's like this was situational and it's terrible. But if we were going to locate it somewhere, it feels to me like it would have its origin could be located in the system.
For sure.
And now, because the school was like, we got to be closed, the teachers will go away, right? And now the same people who, let's put a fine point on it, caused it, are saying we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
We're going to fix it, Pam. And
No
not just we're going to institutionalize the fixing of it here where we made the problem. Don't worry, you should trust us. But the exact same people. So it's not like they're going out and they're saying, let's find thousands of Pams because we done effed up A-Rod. Like, that's not what they're saying. We got to go find some really good experts to like kind of clean up our mess. I'd have more respect if they said that. If they said, we need Pam, could you please go find, 1,000 Pams? Because we can't be trusted with this stuff. We got a little cuckoo for a few years. No, they're saying, we're exactly the right people. Let's sit in a circle, talk about our feelings.
Well, what's interesting is, full disclosure, my immediate family still believes that the lockdowns and the mandates and all that were helpful. I don't know if they think it was helpful, but they don't think it was bad or wrong. They treat it as if it was sort of like a storm or like a natural disaster that kind of just happened, and that we're just picking up the pieces now. Like my family lives in New Jersey, so like there was Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy. I feel like it's being treated very similarly. Like, now we're just rebuilding after the storm, and they're not looking at it as, well, actually there were specific decisions that were made to create this storm, and so there's a disconnect. So I think these people, there's obviously the people at the top who I think who know exactly what they're doing, but I think for the most part, the people who are implementing this or going along with it just don't recognize that this was about decisions that were made, as opposed to they just think it was just a really bad thing that happened. Like, the virus was bad and we're all just recovering.
Happened.
It just happened. And that's really their worldview. So they don't see themselves as the ones that caused the problem. They see it was just a bad thing that happened in, like, a car accident or something.
In psychological parlance?
I don't know.
All of that.
What do you think?
Well, I'm just saying, when people,
denial.
Thank you. I like it's a simple word, but it really. Oh, my sound is cutting out. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I don't know. But when people take a look at a situation and they just remove themselves and from any responsibility whatsoever for making decisions or even complying with decisions, and it made the decisions that much more, possible to, last longer, all that kind of stuff, or flat out pushing for them, like the NEA, like, how dare you, or this teachers union in LA. And then they turn around and go, this was a thing that just, act of God, it just happened. Or they'll talk about, the C word happened. It's like, no, that didn't cause the schools to close. That didn't cause, that little creature doesn't go and slam doors and lock them. So anyway, we could go on.
So they don't see themselves as, like, the way you pose the question, just I think you, I, and probably your audience agree that this is about decisions. This is about a worldview where there was tyranny. There were decisions that were made that were harmful, that didn't help.
Right.
Usually we think about costs and benefits. I don't think there were even any benefits to this.
Right.
Usually there's some benefits you could argue, but I don't even think there are. Literally, I think we'd be a lot better off if they absolutely did nothing at all.
Yep.
But people who are really going along with the narrative, like, they just don't see it. They're like really living in a completely different reality.
What?
So that's why it's hard. We're I think that's why we're hitting this wall
Right.
with
Right.
people that are running these schools, because the people who are teachers, the people who are in education, tend to have the other worldview, not the one about personal responsibility. They have more of a collectivism worldview, and they are much more. This is what I learned. They're much more followers. They follow along, and they're rule followers too. Like, they
Sure.
want to be cooperative. They want to be good little people and do the right thing, and they don't want to hurt people, and they want to be seen as tolerant and all those things. And so they just don't see it. We can't. I wish. I mean, I just can't. I can't believe I still can't even get my own immediate family to see it
Right.
after all of this. So if I can't get
Well,
my
that's
family to understand, how are we going to get a teacher to understand?
well, and I can't help but wonder when we're talking about children and teenagers, how to what extent they are affected by the adults' inability to take responsibility, to kind of cope, to, just looking around. Even I, as an adult, looked at how some adults behaved and I said, I'm really glad I'm not a child right now, because if I had to walk out in the world and see all y'all, or go on the internet and see how people were treating each other, how they were reacting to just small things like small stressors or slights, how it was very strange. I think as a child, I probably would start to sort of pull back or recoil from adult life or from growing up. I mean, I would
Yeah.
not look at growing up and the things that come with it as something that I aspire to do. I mean, there's certain things I would. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm kind of psyched to be able to, I don't know, be on my own, maybe. I'm not sure. But drive, people go crazy on the roads.
Yeah.
It would go out and it was like everybody was on edge. They still are. So I kind of see young people being a little, they're like holding back. I also wouldn't necessarily be as inclined to go out and seek people out and make friends and all the things, because the levels of trust, for such a wide variety of reasons. First of all, there were the people who thought I'm going to get sick, the people who thought you're going to make me sick, the people who said I don't trust you because you're making me do things I don't want to do, people who said I don't trust you because you're not doing the things I want you to do. And the division was so effective
It really was.
amongst adults that I can't help but feel like a lot of the mental health stressors that our kids were facing were coming, from those things. And they're rushing to the solution. I guess my point is, my opinion is they're rushing to a very heavy-handed top-down solution inside of the schools. There has not ever been let's look at what happened and let's unpack it, as they would say. That's not happening. We're going to jump right in and we're going to apply all these fixes. Now, let's talk. So you agree with that they're
Oh yeah.
rushing in to fix things. Okay. I
Oh
want to
yeah.
talk.
And
Okay, go
like,
ahead.
and
Go
as
ahead.
you well, just I mean, just the obvious, like, the solutions are not going to be the solution. So whatever. Like,
That's what I want to talk about.
yeah.
That's what I want to talk about. So, in your words, what are you seeing as their proposed solutions?
I mean, like, well, they're treating every single student as if they have problems, as if they have mental illness. They're also, I mean, the thing that I've been fighting against the most is they're treating every single family as though they're dysfunctional and that they're not to be trusted instantly without even getting to know the family or knowing any context or situation of the student that they're supposedly helping. So there's like, now they're starting from this place of everybody has problems. Everybody needs fixing in some shape or form. Everybody needs therapy of some way. I mean, I've been listening to ads of like BetterHelp and those things, and I just hear those stupid ads like everybody could use therapy, like as if everybody needs to brush their teeth. It's not the same thing. And no, not everybody can benefit from therapy, and In fact, sometimes therapy is not always the best thing for everybody, and it's not for individuals' sake and also culturally. So I just think they're imposing their values onto people so hard that they're causing more damage than helping.
What happens to people, in particular very young people who are still figuring themselves out, when they spend a lot of time talking about and thinking about their feelings?
Yeah, they become narcissistic. I mean, we all do. And I think that's what's happening because we're all online too much and we're thinking about ourselves like I mean, just a physical thing. So I have a knee problem right now. I start researching my knee. I start to obsess about my knee and my it's just making me worse and it doesn't help when you just start obsessing about this problem that you have. You're trying to figure out what it is, what's going on. You start seeing videos of people with their knee and what's happening and it, all of this like kind of self-reflection,
Yeah.
self-obsession, having to identify yourself in these all these different manners. I think it's terrible for young development. And I think that's one of the major reasons we're having a mental health crisis because we're telling kids they need to be all these identities or not be these identities. I mean, no, we're not even just talking about trans, just of like anything. They're just. I think we're teaching kids to focus so much on themselves. And what I miss about being a child, and I think you would say the same, from coming from our generation, is like I miss just kind of just being present, being in the moment, and just not thinking about things, not thinking about the future, not thinking about the past, kind of really being present. And I think that's what's so beautiful about being a child, being a healthy child. And we're actually pulling kids away from that natural state of being present as a child when we do all these, I'd say, woke type teachings.
I think we're also I talked to Stephanie Wynn about this. I think we're pathologizing childhood itself. So just
Mhm.
like we pathologize puberty, like, before that it was pregnancy. Like we're going to treat pregnancy like a disease. It's
Yeah.
not. But that's how they treat it in our particular kind of medicine in this country. Then we moved on down to puberty. Oh, do you really want cramps? Do you really want to have these problems? Do you really want your voice to change? Do you really want to have these things happening in the night while you're sleeping? We can fix that. You take a pill, so we're taking things that are natural, not just natural, but they're important. The like vitally important
To
developmental
get to the next
processes.
stage of life, yeah.
Exactly. And we're making it into everything from a mild inconvenience to something that's like akin to a disease or a trauma. Puberty is
Mhm.
traumatic. And I'm like, no, it's not. Just like birth is not de facto traumatic for
It's
the
not.
baby or for the mother. Now there are things that can happen during birth and both that could be traumatic, but pregnancy itself, delivery itself is not a de facto trauma any more than puberty, any more than any of these other things. Even menopause. It's not a trauma. There's things that I don't particularly love, but it's not in and of itself a trauma. And we're
Mm-mm.
calling everything a trauma. Everything is
Everything.
traumatic.
And we're creating fear. So young people who are even before puberty are scared of puberty because of
Yeah.
everything they're seeing, everything they're hearing. They're being taught to be scared of it. They're being
Yeah.
taught that their body is going to change and all these scary things are going to happen,
Right.
instead of just letting it happen. And yes, it can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't necessarily have to be scary.
No.
Speaking from personal experience, like I was left behind. I was a late bloomer. I was so jealous of all my friends growing up and developing. I was like a little
Yeah.
squirt that didn't get it. So I'm personally like I don't relate to the narrative of like, once you develop then it's really traumatic because I was like
Yeah.
waiting for it to happen. But I
Right.
also didn't grow up in an age where there was porn and the internet and where, kids were hypersexualized like they are today. And I think the environment has really made it more difficult.
Right. So when the kids, so we went from the message of you're responsible for adult problems and to fix things. And now you're in school and they have narratives about you got to fix the world, racism, poverty, inequity, all that stuff. So that adds another layer of like big responsibility onto a kid who's going, I just want to not have pimples anymore.
Yeah.
And then you have we're going to tell you that your natural development process, may or may not be the correct one to match what you're supposed to be.
Yeah, the
Think
wrong
about yourself
puberty.
all day. Here, by the way, here are some websites you can go to. Here's Tumblr. Here's some people like Jeffrey Marsh. Go watch some of his video.
Oh no,
You know,
no.
figure out who you are, kid, and then we'll put rainbows and sparkles all over you if you're these kind of people, and then you'll get all kinds of protection. Tell us about that. How much does this focus on feeling and identity and narrative and all that, the empathy stuff? How much do you believe that appeals to children such that they will gravitate towards it when they otherwise wouldn't have? Because that's a big bone of contention. A lot of people are saying you have two schools of thought. You have the school of thought that says, well, we're more accepting now and we see it more now. And so that's why you see this explosion in these number of kids, is that they were in hiding before and they were lying before. And we're just giving them space to be their authentic selves, versus people like me who say kids are impressionable. Their number one, in the hierarchy of needs is safety. And if they have any other thing going on in their life that makes them uncomfortable, that if there's a thing they can latch onto that provides them an instant blanket of protection from the adults in their environment, I mean, provided from, not the adults are going to hurt them, but they perceive that the adults will protect them more, that they have more power over their peers who they're a little scared of or intimidated by, or just jealous of, whatever their emotion might be. Instead of dealing with that negative emotion, if the adults come in and say oh, we love you and celebrate you, and here we're just going to have a day and a month and a year that's all dedicated to you. How much do you think that happens? I mean, am I nuts? Because
I think it happens
all the time.
All the time. Yeah. I mean, I think it's very strange. I mean, I think a lot of things are strange, but I think it's really strange that people just can't see through it. Like how we're inundated with all of this media influence. All of us, adults and kids, we're inundated. I mean, you can't get away from these flags. You can't get away from, I mean, everywhere you turn, there's something trans, there's something, anti-racist, there's something that's, that's about toxic masculinity, or, I mean, it's just everywhere, right? So I just don't understand. I guess it's like when you're swimming in water, you don't know you're in water or whatever, like the goldfish doesn't know. I guess since maybe, and I think the children especially wouldn't know the world could be different if they're not inundated with these messages all of the time. But yeah, 100%, this is what is happening. And I 100% agree with you. I think kids are being influenced. They're being rewarded for taking on a different identity, especially kids who are in upper middle class, who are white or even just lighter skinned, or maybe considered white adjacent. Like some Asian kids here in the Bay Area have really gravitated towards being the trans identity. Yeah. I've really noticed how there's so many different sort of types or kids that gravitate towards it, and it's usually somebody with a vulnerability of some shape or form. And depending on how deep they get into it, usually they get deeper into it if they have a deeper trauma, or if they have more difficulty, their family is really struggling, there's a real vulnerability at home, or we know a lot of autistic kids are gravitating towards this because otherwise they don't fit in, or they don't know how to kind of relate to the world. And if they become a trans kid, then people will kind of give them that acceptance that they're really seeking. And they also, I hear also directly from the kids that they say, well, now I knew what to do, I knew what to say, like I knew how to be, it gave them this little script. And instead of, the world is so confusing, especially if you don't understand how to navigate it socially. The trans gives you this whole script, and then you get the script, and then you receive the script, and then it's it's a lot easier, and it's a lot more predictable. So you can see how these kids who don't fit in, who get love bombed, who get glitter families, who really see things concretely, they would really gravitate towards wanting to be trans, or even just gravitate towards this sort of social justice culture that makes them feel as though they're doing the right thing and they're fitting in, because otherwise they wouldn't know what to do, because it's it's gray. There isn't it. We have social skills training. We have like I know a lot about DBT. There's a whole interpersonal effectiveness module, but that stuff it's still hard to navigate. Humans and social contact is difficult, and if that's something that doesn't come to you easily, then it's really hard when you're a kid, and you do a lot of them do get bullied for it, and that sort of thing, and it becomes sort of this shield, like you said, but from adults and from their peers. I noticed too, like when I was running the groups, and there was like they were all non-binary, and when I
Right.
was working, and they were all girls at that time, and whenever a girl was talking about their non-binary identity, or they're talking about maybe their parent who they thought was transphobic or something, they would instantly get back a lot of feedback from their peers, like, "Oh, you're so brave, you're so wonderful, I know it's so hard for you." And so they would get, it would fill that emptiness that they had. It would make them feel like, they were okay, because there was usually something else. There was an underlying issue that they were not addressing, and then they got this sort of superficial, like feedback from socially, so they knew what to do, and it felt, I think I could see why they would feel safer that way. And yeah, what was crazy though was when the adults were like, "Yeah, you're non-binary, let's go along with it, and yeah, you're right, your parents are transphobic, even though they do love you. I see they love you, but they're transphobic." And I just couldn't. That was wild to watch that, interaction. But yeah,
Yeah,
for
you
sure.
bring you say okay, so and I've always found it strange that anyone would deny it, because the very same people, literally, who are saying we have to teach the kids anti-racism and equity and all the stuff, because otherwise they'll grow up to be racist in this white supremacist society, or we know we have to teach this to make them think that, or to prevent them from thinking XYZ. So they're saying out loud, we know or we believe that our teaching changes thoughts. They're
Oh
like,
yeah.
what we teach will impact the thoughts children have. They're screaming it from the rooftops. If we don't teach them how to be anti-racist, they'll be racist, per Kendi. So then in the next breath, they tell you, like, you parents are paranoid. We don't have that much influence. If only we can have that much influence. I'm like, then could you maybe just go back to math and English and science and stop pushing all the social justice? Because if you're telling me that it's the big emergency of the century, that we have to get these kids to not grow up to be horribly inequitable, supremacist racists, and your teaching and your worldview and this lens that you're going to use is the only way to change their thoughts to right thinking. And then you want to turn around and claim that teaching about the gender unicorn doesn't change their thoughts?
Right. Yeah, it's all, nothing
I'm
really makes
sorry.
sense.
Maybe I'm not very smart, but that sounds like double speak to me. Like, it works this way, but it doesn't work that way. No, we don't actually. No, it doesn't work like that. And I'm like,
What's interesting, as you said that, it made me think of the worldview. So I'll just tell you, like, I grew up, or I've been surrounded by, and I'd say I very much myself was a very naive liberal for most of my life. And my worldview as a naive liberal is most people are good, humankind is good. There are a few bad apples, but people are good, inherently good. Conservatives don't tend to see it that way. They tend to see, they know that atrocities will happen. They look at history and they know that if mankind is left to their own devices, like in Animal Farm and George Orwell type novels, that humankind is not inherently good, and we need to teach children how to not go with their urges and their instincts that are difficult, or that are harmful, or bad, or evil, whatever. I don't know what the right word is. It's just interesting, this worldview. But so we've got liberals, and I was one that was very naive and thought, like, well, everyone's inherently good. We don't need to teach them that, to stop being bad and stop thinking bad thoughts. When I've always thought, like, kids were innocent in terms of, especially about race,
I
like,
always
they
thought
don't
that
look at,
too.
yeah. I mean, as a liberal, that's how I saw it. So it's a very strange flip-flop to be like, well, we need to teach kids to be anti-racist. Like, they're born anti-racist, because if
You're
racism is a
taught
social
racism.
construct,
You're
yeah, so
literally taught racism. It's a social construct, but it's not. They're inborn in the skin. I mean, the
it doesn't, nothing
contradictions.
makes sense as soon as you start really thinking about it. Yeah.
No.
So,
And somebody said earlier, one of the comments that came up pretty far back was about how children this one, Eternal Genju says, I suspect a smart enough child realizes the weaponization of empathy quickly in the current climate. I agree with this.
I
I
hope so.
really well, I think there are plenty of children, not all of them, maybe not even the majority, but there are plenty of kids out there who are looking around at adults. I've said it on my shows before. I think you have sort of like three categories of kids these days. You have the ones who are just, yes, teacher. I mean, like whatever the adult says, it's present in their life all day, and they just kind of go with that, follow the herd, whatever's go along to get along, and they believe it. Then you have another group that says, what's the script? I'll play the game. They sort of neither believe it nor disbelieve it. They just don't really think too deeply about it. They don't really care. They say the script at school. They say the script at home. They don't think too deeply about it. Boom, boom, done. But it doesn't really affect them all that much. They're going to be what they're going to be, probably more like what they're at home, because whatever, that happens at school. And then you have this other group, the outliers. I think they're really outliers, but they're the ones that go, you people you're messed up. Like, what the, so they're looking at both groups. They're looking at the groups that are going along to get along, and they're like just so total sheep, and they're like, oh my God. And they're looking at the people who are sort of like cynically playing the game and thinking, why are you going along with it? Like, they don't mean anything. It's no big deal. Like, we see them in adult life. We see the people go,
I was
it's
just
just how
same with adults. Yeah.
it's just how it is. You just got to do it. And then, but those of us who see it, we're like, why are you going along with it? You see that they're sheep. So why are you doing the same thing that sheep do? But you say it's better because you know that you're doing it. It's like, no, it's not better because you know you're doing it. And then who's at the tippy top? The clown show, leading the parade. And let's talk about that. To what extent do you think mental illness reigns supreme in the adult population within the schools?
I don't know. I mean, it depends how you define mental illness these days, right? Like,
narcissism, not mental illness, but like it's on a spectrum. We know it's on a spectrum, but let's say high on the narcissism scale.
I mean, like, there's different. I mean, this is hard because,
I'm not asking you to diagnose someone. I'm just like, randomly, when you look around, the people who are, taking videos, walking through parks, calling Ron DeSantis a fascist and saying that they're going to teach what they want in their classroom anyway. Like, what do you think's going on in that?
I don't know. Like, in some ways, like, I don't see those people. It depends on the person. I can't read their minds, but some of them I don't even see as mentally ill. I see them just putting on a show, and the people who are really mentally ill are the ones that are getting ignored.
I see what you're saying.
So
like they're just trying to get attention.
They're the attention seekers. And I think there's something wrong. There's something empty about them. There's something missing in their life that might be causing them to run into that behavior. But I guess I don't see that as like real mental illness, like where I've worked in programs where people have schizophrenia, people have bipolar type 1, where they really can't control their manic episodes, where they have trauma to the point where they, have really severe PTSD, flashbacks and nightmares. And like, that's what I view as mentally ill. When people are just acting a fool and kind of just being little assholes, I don't see them as necessarily mentally ill. I just see them being little assholes. But usually there's something negative that's driving it, and like they probably need some kind of help, like, but I guess it depends on the individual.
But that's really interesting because you are making a very clear distinction. And I think this is important because with all the therapy speak, which we're going to talk about, with all the therapy speak out there, I think there is a tendency to look at people who are buying into all of this, like normalizing the not normative, okay, to the extent like we're celebrating, not just accepting that, some people are different, but this is better and normal is bad. That's that the tendency is to say they're ill, right? I just said it. I just said, well, how many are mentally ill? And I'm, half joking, but there are people who are serious who say like, they're all mentally ill. And you're drawing the distinction that no, mental illness is serious and real. And the people who suffer from it, really, truly suffer from it, they need help. And they're less likely to get that help that they need because we are now diagnosing everybody as, having at minimum generalized anxiety disorder, right?
Exactly.
And that's like the minimum. That's like your baseline of we wake up in the morning and 99% of you, according to schools, have anxiety disorder, not just you're anxious. Used to be to
Right.
be like, are you anxious today? No, you're anxious one day, you have a disorder according to
Yeah.
school. If you're sad, if you're like things aren't going my way, I'm having kind of a rough week. Oh, it's depression. So they're taking what was a very serious illness, they're trivializing it, in my opinion, by making it's like, oh, anyone can have it. Oh, by the way, put it in your bio. Um, we're not actually helping those people. First, we can't find the people who genuinely need help because where do you find them?
Right.
You have people masquerading as having it and learning the symptoms and pretending to have them because it gets you attention, it gets you out of class, it gets you to do things. And
Exactly.
before the show, you mentioned that you had some experience with that, right? With people
Yes.
like picking up on that. Tell us about that.
So, in from 2014 to 2016, I worked at a high school in Palo Alto, gun high school. And anybody who's familiar with the Bay Area probably knows that that high school is kind of infamous for suicide. There was a suicide cluster the year that I worked there. There was actually 2 suicide clusters. There was one in 2009 and then in 2015, 2016. I was there for the second cluster. I was actually in private practice and I met some of the families who were impacted by the first cluster. But obviously the community was reeling from all of this. And
Right.
what I found was there were kids that were really struggling with mental illness. That I met kids there that had schizophrenia, that were seeing voices, hearing voices, seeing things, or
Oh,
had serious
God.
issues or had serious depression. They weren't, I don't believe they were faking it. They were really struggling. And a lot of them were more under the radar. And then there were the kids
Right.
that knew exactly what to say because they were training all of them on all the signs of suicidality. So they literally learned the script on what to say, on how to get people to notice them and get out of
Right.
class, out of their quizzes, out of anything, and to be heard and noticed. And so there were these 2 kind of groups of kids, where the ones who really needed help, and then there was this whole bunch of kids that, because they're teenagers, and this is sort of natural human nature, I think, that learned that if I say certain things, that people will notice me and they'll care about me more, and I'll feel more cared about, right?
Right.
So I think that's what's happening on a wide scale here. Well, we're normalizing all of this therapy speak, all these diagnoses, and I think that's part. I mean, part of it is status. People are using this. It's just cultural, where people are diagnosing themselves or diagnosing each other. But I also think it's people want to be cared for. They want to be seen. They want to be noticed. They don't. They I think our society as large, people are not able to like fill that hole inside of them. I think
Yeah.
children are struggling with that for whatever, all sorts of reasons. Yeah, exactly. Working the system is normal for teens. This is like natural. So exactly, like kids know how to test limits. These are
Yep.
we set the when we adults set up a system where they can test the limits and they know exactly where they can get what they want, they'll do it. At all
Yeah.
costs, they'll do it. This is human nature, and especially with teenagers. And we as adults, we should know better. We should know when to set limits. But unfortunately, because the community was really hurting, was really fearful, had gone through a lot of grief and loss because there were some real suicides, all in a row, and there was a lot of fear. So people were on edge and they were unfortunately overcompensating, and so then the kids took advantage.
Yeah.
S-
And it's so sad because when things like that happen, I think it's normal and natural for the adults to say, do something, like what's going on? And then there's pressure on the people in the system to respond like they're supposed to do something rather than even though the best solution might be this is horrible and we are just so sorry for the families and everything. We're gonna just keep our eyes and ears open and we're gonna express our grief, but we're gonna get on with it. We're gonna keep on keeping on because really there's nothing that we can specifically do within the confines of the school that is likely to first of all, we can't identify what we specifically did to cause this.
Yeah,
So
every
we
kid
can't
was different too. It
yeah,
really was all different
it could
situations.
be any number of variables. There's so many complex factors that go into something so horrific. So we can't begin in a short period of time to isolate what we might have contributed to this. Even if they admitted and said that maybe there was something, but we're not going to be able to serve the rest of the children and figure it out in any kind of a timely manner. So we're just going to keep on moving forward and do the best we can and express our grief and move on, and life goes on. And we're sorry that that's how it is, but that, for the families that lost, but that's what we're going to do, even though that's probably exactly the right thing to do, because then kids learn, at least, like, that is, tragedies happen and they're really, really sad. It didn't happen to me though. And unless it's their best friend or their brother or sister. But what I'm saying is, it didn't literally, it's like they're still here and they've got to go to school and they've got to press on. I've gone to schools that have had, when I was a kid, there was a suicide, and that's close to what happened.
Yeah,
That's pretty
that was
close to
then.
what,
Do you wanna know
that's
what
what,
the school did when you said that? You wanna hear the response? And actually, most of the counselors agreed with me that this was the wrong response, but because the school was under such scrutiny, they felt like they had to do something, exactly what you just said.
yeah.
And I think it was a lot about appearances, because I think they even knew it wasn't useful, but they just, if something else happened, then they could say, "Well, we did all of these things," right? So what they did was, and it was completely unhelpful. So we had a huge list of referrals of kids that really did need help. But when the tragedy happened, they literally took every kid that had any contact with the child that died, that didn't even know the kid, was just in a class with the other child like the year before. They pulled the schedules and they made us check in with every single kid that was in a class with the child who died,
Oh
and
my
just
God.
and disrupt their day and ask them, like, "Are you okay? Do you need help?
Wow.
Do you need support?" And they made us do this with
That's
all, like, hundreds
insane.
of kids. So they would put together these lists of kids that they thought were like of higher need. And
That's,
again, can I tell you, they did all these lists, hundreds of kids I checked in with, or my team checked in with, and unfortunately, every kid that did die by suicide, we never met, ever. So all of this hypervigilance to prevent didn't do a thing, because the ones that needed it weren't on anyone's radar, um, at all.
that is so frustrating. And they I get the pressure to do something, but then I think there's another sort of paradoxical reaction. There's the one that you describe, where we're going to overdo it. We're going to overcompensate and we're going to miss the people who really need help because we're too we're
We're freaking
everything,
out. And
right.
adults were so anxious, the kids didn't know, like, trust them anymore, right? So you got,
Exactly.
they actually didn't feel safe to ask for help, the ones who really needed it, because the adults were freaking out.
They're like, they're
Like,
going to put me in the hospital if I
it
just
was
go and
that,
say I'm having a bad day.
and that happened. And then it was
Yeah.
also like we were living in this invasion of the body snatchers, like, who's going to get snatched up next, who's going to
Oh my
that
God.
was the environment, like. And so there's just this high anxiety, talk about anxiety, like. And I was one of the few people who were rational and knew how to do like a real suicide assessment to understand, like, if
Yeah,
they really had an intent, if they really had a plan, who was really at risk versus someone
exactly.
who's looking for attention, or someone who is struggling but not at the point where they were at physical risk.
Yeah.
And these are, it's nuance. These are things that you have to be able to take a little time and ask those questions. But people just could not determine that. And yes, kids got unjustly hospitalized, or kids got overlooked. And then I also just think that kids didn't know who to trust, because adults were just freaking out. If you got adults freaking out all the time, then that's not good for kids to feel safe.
No, it's not.
We need to
And
hold our
then
shit together.
Then I think there's the flip side, where you have adults, and I think this is a little more common in private school, but I don't want to generalize. It's just what I've seen myself, but I'm sure other people could tell me different stories anecdotally. That when you have kids who come to you saying, I'm being bullied, like for real, and here's my evidence, and it's other kids in the school, and this is, like cyberbullying. I'm thinking, for example, of Nate Bronstein, Rose Bronstein's son in Chicago. He asked for help. He showed evidence. He gave names. He did what he was told to do, that what they tell all the kids to do. Tell someone.
Yeah.
that you are being hurt. Tell someone that this is happening and becoming unbearable. And he did exactly that. And they did nothing up to and including not telling his parents that this was
Yeah.
happening to him. And he did say initially, don't tell my parents, because I think he thought he was going to get his phone taken away or whatever. But that's not their call to make.
Mm-mm.
When a 15-year-old boy says, don't tell my parents that I've told you this, I think that shows two things. He trusted they'd take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they would need to get back to his parents. Maybe he didn't want to worry. But it could be 10 reasons he didn't want to tell them. Okay. And none of them are appropriate for the relationship. So it's one thing for the adult to hear that. It's another thing for them to be a leader, be the adult in the room and say, I understand that you're concerned, but your parents need to know this because they love you and they want to help you. And we'll work together. Or if you want, we can get the school council, whatever. Like it's supposed to be, they're supposed
Working
to act.
together.
They're supposed to bring the family together. Okay. And so they didn't. They didn't tell the parents. Therefore, they couldn't do anything to intercede. And they chose to do nothing. Like, this isn't happening. We don't want
Mm-hmm.
to deal with it. And like I said, there's either we're going to overcompensate or we're going to pretend it's not happening altogether. And I don't see a whole lot of we're going to do something in the middle going on in America right now. And of course, the result was tragic and just awful. But now what I see, you mentioned they're saying all families are dysfunctional. And we just highlighted you're supposed to bring families together.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody messaged me earlier in the week about their church school. And they said, can you take a look at this SEL program? They're bringing it into our church school. So not even a
Oh
public school.
no.
Okay. And I'm looking through it and she said, what do I say? I listened to James Lindsay and you and different people. And I don't want to go in with it's, the globalists and okay. I said, you don't need to. Now tell me, Pamela, what you think of this. I said, what happened to ministry? I'm not even a Christian.
Yeah.
Not even if we're a Jewish day school. What happened to the responsibility of parents put their child in a religious school?
Right.
What happened to the role of the leadership of these organizations, institutions, to bring families together, to keep families together? As soon as you implement SEL, what happens, Pam? In a school?
Yeah, we're dividing families, we're dividing children, and we're pitting children against each other, we're pitting children against their parents. I mean, that's right, that's the Marxism that you and James Lindsay talk about. So
explain to the audience from a psychological perspective, from a social worker's perspective, the mechanics of that, because I explain things in a different, like a different way. I want people to hear from you and I want to learn how does that mechanically work? So example, the student comes into class each day, every class, by the way, and there's something up on the wall that says, check in with a Post-it. How are you feeling today? Put the Post-it by how you're feeling with your name on it. And they put it, I'm feeling good. I'm having a bad day, whatever. And they put up there every class, every day. Maybe then they go and they sit in a circle before their formal learning to share how things are going. And maybe there's a survey they fill out about, do you have a good friend in school, or your parents listen to you, blah, blah, blah. Do you get enough sleep? Who knows what? And then maybe then you finally get to math, and they're going to get to the math problems. And the math problem is about, whether you should have empathy for the kid who can't go to the amusement park because his family doesn't have a car and enough money to pay for it. So they're not going to get there as fast because they have to take the bus. And then the kid who can drive, and how long does it take them both to get there? I mean, these are now math problems.
Yeah, I've heard this. Yeah, I heard James Lindsay give that exact example. Yeah, he's taught me that.
So what happens in that scenario? How does all of that, because I get people saying to me, isn't it just a lot of busy work and it's kind of dumb, but how does that separate my kid from me?
Well, what they're doing, what the school is basically saying is, we will take care of your emotional needs instead of your family. I think that's what, I think there's a lot of that, almost like a rescue fantasy happening within schools and teachers. Like the teachers and the counselors think that they know better, that they know the kids better.
Right.
I mean, I think part of it's just temperament. Some of it is age. Like a lot of the teachers and counselors happen to be younger, don't have children of their own. And so they'll identify more with the children. But I think there's a lot of that attitude. But yeah, you're telling the kids that basically, and it's good to tell the kids that, you as an adult is a safe space. I hate that term now, it's overused, but that you're, an emotionally safe place to open up, but also to kind of impose it on them when they maybe wouldn't do it otherwise, when they might do it with their parents instead. I think then that you're starting to cross over those boundaries where you're not no longer you're not supporting the family, you're trying to be the family, and that's the problem.
Let's hang out here for a second. You said when you impose it on them. I like
Yeah.
that phrase because we need to constantly remind ourselves that school is compulsory. So if their parents are not going to homeschool you or put you in, some other kind of arrangement where you don't go to some kind of school, you're truant, right? So you're compelled to be in a space or be homeschooled. And once you get there, and it's not like I said, church schools, private schools, public schools, it's SELs everywhere. And when you get there, if it is part of the curriculum, really infused into everything, now they call it school-wide SEL, that you share your feelings or are at least asked about your feelings constantly. So even if you've got a will of iron as a kid,
Yeah.
and
Then
good
right,
luck
then
with
you
that,
still have to, like,
you
deal
still have
with
to say
saying n
no.
decline. Yeah.
And so you're being compelled to do something you probably, no one ever asked me my feelings in school, and thank God. I am eternally grateful that my teachers, thinking back on me, and I had some good teachers. I like my teachers, but nope, didn't want to talk about my feelings with my teachers. So we've forgotten
It's
that. We
better. Yeah,
adults,
we
I
don't
think, have
wanna think
forgotten that.
about we don't wanna constantly
No,
think about our feelings all the time. I mean, if you sat there and thought
no,
about your feelings all the time, you'd just go crazy. And so children.
especially at that age.
Yeah. I'll tell you though, like, as a person who used to think like them a little more, maybe not as much, but like did. So when it came to kids with real behavioral issues that would act out, the school of thought was, and now I'm questioning all of it. I'm not even sure where I land on this, but kids who are really acting out, a lot of the school of thought is, well, that's because they can't express themselves. They don't have the words for their feelings. If they can say, I'm really angry, if they can say, Johnny hurt my feelings, then they're not going to go and hit Johnny. They're able to work it out in a more mature way. Kind of likening it to a toddler, they're going to have more temper tantrums because they don't have the verbal ability to express themselves. We as adults
Right.
have the verbal ability, but then also I'm realizing children don't have the emotional maturity either, even if they have the verbal capacity. So now we're giving them all these words, but they don't have the emotional maturity to handle these words that we're giving them. But yeah, so I'm still trying to tease out when it might be helpful to, because when a kid was acting out, usually it was because they were a little behind in their ability to express themselves. But
Right.
that like what social emotional learning is where they take something where it's like maybe a kid actually could benefit from this thing, like a certain kid of a certain demographic, and they give it, across the board to kids that don't need it. And so
Right.
now we're telling kids that are just maybe developing normally, don't have any kind of behavioral issues, to think about their feelings, express their feelings, sit there and do mindfulness exercises and do a scan of how they feel all the time. That's not necessarily helpful for them. It's not like, I think people of the counseling mind might think, oh well, this will help them be more emotionally mature when they grow up, but I think it kind of has this contra and what's the word, it's going against
Well,
their
it's
paradoxical.
paradoxical. It's like, yeah, it's
That's
like,
the word.
yeah,
Thank you.
they're
I
just
hate when I can't think of the
right.
word.
No, but I mean, it's also, I think, I keep using this word. I must confess, I kind of love it, but I know people hate when I do it. But iatrogenic. If you take something that's supposed to be a solution and you create the problem, or you create a bigger problem than the one you're trying to fix. It's like giving
That's it.
medicine to people who don't need it, and it's a big problem. So I think with the mechanics of SEL, compelling the child to share feelings in what's essentially public. They don't not best friends with all those people.
Right.
And the teacher's an adult who is not a trusted adult. I don't care what the teacher says. That's not a trusted adult.
And they don't know how to handle feelings.
No, no.
Teachers, they spill their emotions all over the kids, or then they start to want to fix the kid in an inappropriate way. It's just not appropriate all around. They're not trained for this.
Yeah,
I mean, it took me years to figure out how to be a counselor that's appropriate, that's not going to
right.
have that feeling where I want to take them home every day and
No,
fix
and
it.
it really isn't appropriate. And teachers are also mandatory reporters.
Hmm.
So what has always baffled me is when they say that they need to deal with it in-house in the classroom, et cetera, and they justify keeping secrets from parents, whether it's about a child's, gender identity, claims and pronouns and so forth. And I want to change my name and change my clothes, whether it's about that all the way to, the kids saying they're depressed or the kids saying this or that. And they, if you truly suspect, because their excuse is, well, they're, I'm afraid they're being abused at home. Okay, you have an obligation, if you believe that enough, to keep a secret about something as important as the kid is depressed, the kid is, not whatever the problem is. You have to tell somebody. That's the law. And
Yeah.
instead, we're crafting new policies to make it easier for them to keep secrets because they believe the child is or might be abused. Well,
Yeah, I don't
how far are you
understand
going
it.
to go? You're still sending them home every day. So put your money where your mouth is. Either you really believe they're being abused or you're using that as an excuse to seize sort of power from the parents to keep it in the school. And obviously I have my theories, and everybody who's a regular viewer of this show knows what they are. But what what do you think? Is there a reason, or is it just incompetence? Are they just incompetent, or is this on some level a power grab?
Well, I think the teachers, most of the frontline teachers don't, I think they're naive and they're just doing what they're told or following what other people are doing culturally. I also think they do have this sort of rescue fantasy that they think they can handle it better than the parents. I think they imagine in their heads what's happening at home that's very different than reality because they hear children don't always tell the whole truth. I mean, they're
Right.
children, and even if they're not like flat out liars, they just don't know the whole story, and there's usually more to the story.
Right.
And it's really easy. I'll just tell you honestly, like it is really easy to side with the kid. And if you're not trained to stop yourself from doing that, it's really easy to land there. So I think teachers are doing that mostly out of like probably incompetence, I guess, or just not recognizing what they're doing and what their position of power really is, and
Mhm.
out of naivete and out of just maybe like really believing they're a little bit better than the parents in that area, that they're cooler or something, or
Right.
some I don't know what the right word is. Counselors and teachers always sort of have that attitude, like, "Oh, I'm the one the kid can confide in, not their parent, because, their parents are the ones that have to lay the law, and their parents are just lame or they're fuddy-duddies or something like that."
That is
So
just so bizarre to me, though. I mean, I'm thinking back even to when I began teaching in 1990. And I remember, and this was true of most of my peers too. I had other issues with some of my peers, but this wasn't one of them. We had very strict professional code of ethics as far as boundaries and children. We weren't even meant to hug them. Like I taught
right.
elementary school and I was like, nope, you may not hug the children. That is that you can sort of put your hand on their back to, show them that you're there and you care. You may,
Side
speak at a
hug. We do that. Side hug. I don't know if you ever did
yeah,
that.
you may, and only if the kid like seeks it out, kind of like it's
Right.
very obvious they need that, but you don't just go up to a kid and hug them.
No, no,
Um,
no.
no, we weren't even supposed to. If a kid had an accident, first grade, I taught, if an accident, like you were not supposed to go into the restroom with them. You could
Mhm.
hand them the change of clothes or whatever. If that wasn't going to work out, you could call their parent. You could go to the nurse. I mean, there was a protocol,
Yeah.
and this
It's
is
all
for
gone.
female teachers, male teachers, for everybody. And so I'm seeing now like boundary violations upon boundary violations from everything from the way teachers speak to the students and ask to be spoken to themselves, and they think it's hip and cool, whatever. I'm like, no, this is psychological abuse. You don't realize you're abusing your position of power when you are doing this. And then I'm seeing it happen in the therapy world where
Yeah.
therapists or school counselors working with teens in particular are doing this. Are you seeing this as well? Where they're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
"Oh, I tell me whatever you want to tell me. We're just gonna. I'm your friend. Just confide in me."
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was seeing, and that's really what made me step up, 'cause I noticed that people were observing that about teachers, but they were forgetting about the therapists and the school counselors that were doing the same thing, and honestly, I think they're doing it worse because as a counselor, they're coming to you because they're having some kind of problem, to confide in them. They're not just a general teacher, right? So I feel like that's even more abusive of power, the way you were saying. So that really worried me. I mean, my experience from the era of 2016, 2017, that wasn't happening on such a big scale. And then I came back to work in 2021 and things were very much different.
Mhm.
And it was extremely shocking. I'd never heard of, all these years. I mean, I worked, so I like started grad school in like 1997. All these years, this was in New York University. I took I also was trained out in Berkeley. The whole kind of mentality was we involve families, family therapy. In fact, I was reading a Thomas Sowell book from 2005, and his criticism of social workers from that era was that social workers were too involving of parents that were actually abusive, and the kids should have been pulled from the home more
Yeah.
quickly. That
And by the way, that still happens. The irony of all of this is as much as they're going into healthy homes or they're, indirectly and messing with people's heads, they are still, we hear stories like roughly weekly of a kid who's sent back to abusive birth parent, like taken out of a foster home that was caring. They do
Yeah.
exist. And put back with parents. There was a baby this happened to. It just like absolutely drove me nuts hearing this story. And the social workers were like, well, it's policy, whatever. So it still happens in both directions.
Yeah, it's like worse now because now I think they're what their caseloads were always really overwhelming in that environment, and now they're creating more problems with
Yeah.
dividing families that wouldn't otherwise be there. Kids are
Right.
going into they're being they're I was reading that at the same time and I got distracted.
Sorry. No, that's okay. Because I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I just didn't want to like not get to it because this is
Yeah, I want to
super
read that.
important. This is
Um,
super important.
Yeah. So, well, the point is that, yeah, we have kids that really, or families that are really in crisis that really need help. And then we're creating crisis with other families that otherwise would be okay if they were left alone or
Right.
maybe given a very minor intervention, just like,
Right.
hey, you guys, let's have one little conversation and talk about why you're not like communicating well and go on
Yep.
your merry way. But instead, they're actually, putting kids into group homes or
Yeah.
keeping secrets from families and dividing families even harder. So yeah, so that's why they're basically just like diluting the whole thing so that the kids that really need
Yeah.
help, it's kind of like what I was saying before about just generally about mental illness, like people with severe mental illness aren't being seen because we're calling everybody mentally ill. So that's what I'm noticing. So now let me read this. Well, you can
So
talk.
so the comment says if I feel if a child has some kind of weight on their shoulders, in most cases better options for them to approach someone in private would go farther than a teacher placing a spotlight on them.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's
100%.
such a good point. Every time I go to speak to people about SEL, I have to bring that point up. I'm like, they're like, but they're just working on managing their emotions. Like, do you want to do that in public? Do you
Mhm.
want your kid doing that in front of the whole class? But we're worried about bullying. Okay, good to know. So I should unburden myself in front of my peers that I'm having a really bad day. Tell us what kind of kids are comfortable doing that?
Right, the ones that want attention. Yeah, the ones that really need help are gonna stay quiet. It's
Thank
funny,
you.
I had someone DM me, she's, probably around our age or, not during this era, and she came from an abusive home, and she said, "Thank God my school wasn't doing all this therapy, speak therapy, counseling, because that was her escape, was she could just go to school and just do her work and not have somebody pound her about her feelings, and she could actually escape and be a normal kid for a little while she was at school." So she actually was appreciative that they weren't doing this. So I
Exactly.
mean, kids need normalcy. They don't need to be told that everything is a problem and everything is emotional and everything's anxiety and everything's depression and you need to look out for yourself. You need to look out for your peers. You need to look out for everybody's every minute of the day. It's just not healthy. They need to play. They need
Yeah.
to work. They need to learn. They need to thrive. I mean, they need to be
What
kids.
hap- what happens too when so you talk about the kids who are attention seeking and still be all sharing and all this kind of stuff because I think it gets some attention. Now, the kids who aren't like that, but let's say, the teacher really pokes them and prods them and they just express genuine emotion one of those days. Like they just do, or they do it once and then they learn they don't want to do it again, okay, because it's new. Um, what does that information do in the hands of the attention seekers and the people that were always there? They're always in school. Bullies have
Yeah.
been since forever and they're not going anywhere. So what do they do with information from the depths of your soul about how bad you're having a time? How safe are you now?
Right, exactly. Not. And I mean, yeah, it's just it does not create a safe space. And then also just if someone's unloading something really vulnerable to a teacher in front of everybody, like it's very unlikely the teachers, even if the teacher honestly has the skills, they don't have the space for it because they've got a room full of kids. They're not in a therapy group, but the therapy groups are not usually the size of a classroom. Therapy groups are usually tops like 8 people. That's like a large therapy group. So it's just
Right.
not conducive to it at all. Like it just
No.
none of it is.
There are
And
also
yeah.
rules. There are rules in group therapy, correct?
Yeah, to
And you
like
can be removed.
confidentiality. Yeah.
There's confidentiality rules. You can be, expelled if you violate these rules, and it's not like you have to come back the next day like school. So school, it's not really the place, right, to do this kind of stuff, is it?
Not at
Now,
all. No way.
what about what they say about meditation? So they'll say, "Well, we're just doing meditation. We're just getting in touch with ourselves before we start the day." What do you think about that? How does that actually, first of all, does a sort of like meditation session at school improve mental health, do you think?
I mean, probably not. Maybe for somebody, I doubt it. I
What Tell
mean,
us more. Tell us more about why you think that is like a marketing gimmicky, new agey, wooey thing
I
that's
mean,
probably and
most
hey,
kids.
look, I like to meditate too, privately, alone, in the silence of my, when no one else is around, not with all the ambient noises in the PA system and the
It's
door
embarrassing.
slamming and
Yeah. I mean, it's embarrassing, like, to really you can't really meditate when you're, like, maybe your crush is sitting next to you or, like, the kid that maybe you're afraid of or that's been bullying you is sitting, across there. I mean, you can't just be in the moment, like, what
yeah.
I mean, that's a skill, I don't know, it's just not realistic to do with kids. Um, and is that really what they do? I don't I
There
mean.
well, there are some schools that are doing, sort of they do these like mindfulness minutes, or they do it ranges from mindfulness minutes where somebody leads them in breathing exercises and they close their eyes and they sit cross-legged on the floor and they do, they really do that kind of thing. There are those some schools that go all the way and they're using what's called heart math, where they strap wearables onto themselves that
Oh,
capture their
no.
heart rate, and that heart rate is being sent to someplace, and they're trying to get on the same heart wavelength with everybody else in the class, and then sometimes with the world. And there are actually people putting that type of stuff. It goes all the way from mindfulness moments all the way to heart math, and depending on where your kids are. And what I'm seeing is there are parents who think this is the bee's knees. My kid gets to meditate and I find it really settles him down, and I'm thinking, why does he need to be settled down so much for school?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the thing you need to think about. And don't get me wrong, I'm saying this from a place of I have a kid with ADHD, okay? I mean, she's an adult now, but she couldn't have been in school
Yeah.
because there was no settling her down. Like that environment where you're constrained and we're going to do this now and then we're going to do that now and you have to do the thing that we tell you to do when we tell you to do it, or you're going to be like kind of out of order. I knew that from the time she was like 4. That was never going to work for that kid. And thank goodness I had the ability to not put her there. And she was able to do school like on a bouncy ball. She was able to do school in 20-minute segments and then go around and run outside and so forth and so on. But if you have a child, especially a younger child, and this particular one was, where they're so running around, that they need, and you feel like that will be good. There's no evidence that it is helping him, just she thinks it will. I'm thinking that's a bigger issue, but that's me. I mean, I
Yeah, I
just don't think
honestly
a few
don't know enough
moments of
about it.
mindfulness
I
is
I
gonna.
mean, now I've become skeptical of everything, and I mean, that's the truth. I probably if you talked to me 10 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, a nice little minute, you know, grounding exercise
I
is not
don't
a
think
bad
it
idea."
hurts. I'm sure
But
I'm not suggesting that a grounding exercise is harmful. Okay, don't hear me say that's harmful. I think the meditation
it's
thing
just
might be a
a
little far.
waste maybe. Yeah. It
That's
depends.
well,
I guess maybe if the the teacher is really good at it and the kids have
Maybe.
gotten into a routine and it helps them, and then they actually do work and they actually learn things after. But is it really just a minute and that's all they do, and then they carry on and actually learn math problems that aren't about roller
Right.
coasters and equity and everything else? So I mean,
Yeah.
if it were
It
really just that, it maybe it wouldn't be so bad.
I guess I sort of feel like what gets lost in all of this talk, all the therapy talk and all the let's do SEL in schools and let's solve the mental health crisis in the classroom is what is supposed to go on in the classroom,
Right.
which is all the other stuff. So psychologically, what what happens to kids when they are not achieving academically in a school setting? And I mean, they know it. You know, it's not like they don't know they can't read or they're not
Right.
reading as well as their peers or they're not reading at all. And it's not like they don't know that they can't really do the math problems that they're asked to do, no matter if the teacher gives them an A or not. They know they can't do it. What happens to a student who knows that their fundamental task of going to school, no matter how much of this other stuff they throw in there, no matter how much activism too, they know I'm supposed to be learning things, but I'm not. What does that do to your mental health?
Yeah, I mean, we have all these like self-esteem they have all these self-esteem efforts, right? These self-esteem programs. And what really builds self-esteem is to create mastery, right? To help the kids actually feel as though they're achieving and they're doing things and they're learning things. And if we
Right.
just kind of ignore that stuff and say, oh, well, everybody gets an A and nobody has a chance to learn and achieve, then I think that creates that low self-esteem, and I mean that could lead to depression and anxiety too, depending on the kids and the circumstances. But yeah, if you're like you said, they know, and then the kids that are achieving and they don't get recognized for it, I think it impacts them too. So I think it goes on both ends. So I
Right.
mean, yeah, these equity or participation trophies, like kind of the everybody gets an A type of environment, I
Yeah.
think is really unhealthy. And I think
Right.
that's really when that started to happen, I think that's when things really started to go downhill.
Right. Now, but it would be fair to say though that the people who are proponents of a lot of these so-called solutions are not incorrect that there's a mental health problem with this age range, K through 12 or whatever in America right now. Would that be fair to say that there is a problem that we have sort of too many kids who are experiencing distress of some kind
Oh,
in
for
this like
sure. I
okay.
mean, yeah, like we just started our conversation in the beginning. Yeah, they induced the whole damn thing. And so, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. So now if you were we've talked about like certain kinds of ways to address certain, like well in this situation with the suicide like might be better to just press on and have a more moment, a day of mourning and that. But in the macro, we see the approach appears to be let's spend hundreds of millions of dollars on programs and curricula and praxis and social workers and counselors and people to go into the schools and do sort of diagnostic. I almost said it was on the I was about to say diagnostic theater. I didn't
yeah,
think that like
that
it's weird. I didn't premeditate that. That was just it
wow.
was like diagnostic theater. It just was gonna like come out of my mouth. Like, wait, that's kind of accurate. But because you can't really diagnose kids from a survey or from like just walking around observing them in class. I mean, diagnosing especially children
Mhm.
with any kind of mental illness, right, is an order of magnitude more challenging than an adult because of all the
Oh,
developmental
yeah.
phases. Okay.
And I
So,
mean, that's just been an ongoing problem even before, I guess, things have really gone haywire. Like in the 90s, kids were heavily overdiagnosed as bipolar because they were just having behavioral problems. And I
right.
mean, I truly don't know who was really bipolar and who were kids were just acting out for other reasons. So that's I think that's always been an issue, and part of that has to do with insurance and getting treatment or getting kids on medication, and that whole conversation about pharmaceuticals and getting kids diagnosed so that they can be on pharmaceuticals for better or worse, so probably mostly worse, but that's probably a whole other podcast to discuss that. So that, I mean, this has been going on for a long time, where, I mean, honestly, I was trained to diagnose much more quickly than I was comfortable doing. You have to some degree, but I think it's being pushed even harder now, and things that wouldn't have been diagnosed in the past are now given labels. So, like you said earlier, everyone has a disorder of some sort.
Right.
Everyone is looked at as like on the spectrum, or when it's like, no, maybe they're just like have a little trouble socially, or they've been on the computer too much and they need actually more just social
Exactly.
time.
Yeah, what happened to just the awkward kid? Like
Yeah,
we all had that kid, right? And they
the
probably
Star
weren't
Wars
all
fans, they're just Star Wars
right. Yeah, they're
fans.
just nerds or geeks or whatever.
In my day, they
Um
were, yeah, they just watched a lot of Star Wars.
exactly. So we've okay, so they're doing all this stuff, and they want to do the community school model where they actually have a health center with the ability to dispense drugs and collect Medicaid, like right there in the building.
Yeah,
They're
it's
trying to
scary.
fast track that. So that's pretty scary. But that's the approach. If you were queen for a day and you could say, here's what I would recommend instead. And and I know it's a tall order, but we all sit around sometimes and fantasize about, like what I would do is what do you think? Because there is a problem. So what do you think would be some better approaches to helping the kids who are still suffering from all this COVID stuff now, 3 years, it's 3 years on, right? Or um what should parents be thinking about asking for, looking to these institutions, or to not do, to do?
Yeah.
What should they maybe be doing to, like, instead of the thing that they're doing in school? Should they get in the way? What do you recommend? Or
Well, I mean,
what would you do?
if I could be queen, or maybe if I could control people or something, I mean, obviously I
Yes,
can't.
like you're the puppet master. What would you do?
I mean, we know that, I think we would agree that the kids that have the strongest families and parents who are more present with them do better. So, I would encourage parents to figure out their priorities in life, and it's not easy. I'm not trying to blame anybody, but I just notice when, and sometimes it really is, you just, their circumstances lead them where they have to work extra hours, or a single parent, or this isn't like because someone's a bad parent, but um
Right.
there are situations where it could be shifted. I remember working especially in the more affluent community where there were kids really complaining, like, I don't care that we just got a new Tesla, I wish my parents were around more. Like, so it's like, thinking about, I mean, kids really
Yeah.
just want their like, they want to be together with their parents, and we're all addicted to screens, adults and kids. So I think really being mindful about our screen use as we're all here sitting here on our screens doing this. But like, if you like, notice, if you want your kid to be less on the screen, notice that you're, what role model you're being with your screen, right? And
Right.
there might be times where your kid might be looking to connect with you, but now you're engaged with something online and they're not going to. And I
Right.
think that's happening more often. um, I think the strengthening of family is allowing for families to connect more. I mean, if therapy is involved, the therapy should be about, for youth, it should be about strengthening families, strengthening the parent-child bond,
Right.
helping the communication, or figuring out what are the underlying issues within the family dynamic.
Yeah.
So I don't think therapy is always a solution for things. Sometimes it does just help to just like have a just do a family more, like, make family
Right.
time more, or I think it's really about strengthening families. So that's what
Yep.
I would focus on, and I think that's the exact opposite of what schools are focusing on. So
Yeah, because we talked about the things that they're doing absolutely separate the family. They come in and replace, social emotional learning is done by parents and, well,
right.
families. It could be extended family, it could be grandparents, it could be aunts and uncles, it could even be your neighbors on the street. The point is, it's people chosen from within that unit, and those that surround that unit. So if you go to church or synagogue or a club or something, the point is that used to be where you would learn how to get along with other people, manage your emotions, behave in public, was to get socialized, etc.
Right.
There's been a lot of emphasis on, well, kids. Sorry, you were about to say something.
No.
Oh no, I think you could. Oh,
Scratching.
on socialization, and well, the kids missed out on socialization at school, and yeah, but I think that's oversold. I
We
think
can't
that's
make up for it. We can't
No,
make up for it.
you can't make you can't now rush in and make up for it and program, first of all, and secondly, I would argue the opposite. I would argue that kids actually, who at least were home and maybe had a parent home or somebody, as frustrating as it was to not be on, be in school with their friends, they may have actually had a break from some of the negative sides. In other words, it was a mixed bag. For some kids, I think it was really a problem. The kids who have horrible toxic homes where school is the outlet, like you described, that was a real problem. There were kids worse. Like, that was terrible. But for kids who have a decent home life, they just don't see mom or dad that often, but because they're all at work and then the parents are home working and then the kids come home, it's like maybe it was a little bit of a boon, because like I got to see my parents more and hang out with my siblings, and I didn't have to go where the school bully beats you up every day. Like, that could have been a better thing. So in other words, I don't think it's a one size fits all how it impacted them. We just know that it did. So it can't be a one size fits all solution. And it certainly can't locate itself within the institution that played such a big role in creating the problem, whether that problem was cutting them off for the academics or cutting them off for the social. But they're not coming in with, we're going to remedy the academics and the social. We're just going to do the social, which puts the emphasis on separating the family again. And we're back to, you're not helping, because now you're probably hurting the people who are fine. You're not helping the people who truly need help. And are they creating a whole new way of looking at mental health too? Do you feel like they're reinventing that as they go?
Well, I just think everybody thinks they're a therapist nowadays. This whole like trauma informed thing that they're implementing in all the
Yes, they talk
schools.
about that all the time.
Yeah, like they say everything's trauma informed, but then they ignore trauma. It's just really bizarre.
What does trauma informed even mean? Like, for real?
Yeah, so I mean, trauma informed means like if someone's presenting with real problems. Like say there's a kid who's acting out, right? They're like, they can't. They're having problems. You would investigate that perhaps there was some sort of trauma or is some sort of trauma happening. Like really, it's more about what I think everyone should be trained about, being a mandated reporter, like looking to see if there is some kind of abuse at home or something like that. Or if we know like maybe something bad happened to that child when they were young, and just kind of keep that in mind, but also not have that be the excuse for every single thing. So I think it's a tricky term. The way we're supposed to handle like it in the like institutions is like kind of like a cognitive behavioral therapy approach, which is something that teachers can't do. They don't know what the heck how to do that.
But wait, that would involve using reason and recognizing reality.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
we can't do that, Pamela. That would involve saying things we're not allowed to say anymore. Can't do
I mean,
that.
I think it's like trauma informed used to mean something when we actually saw trauma for what it was, which is real trauma, and not like being triggered because someone said the wrong pronoun or something like that, right? Like the word triggered's being overused, the word trauma is being overused, and also it's now becoming an excuse for bad behavior, as opposed to, it's a fine line, because it used to be, I'll just say, from my perspective in the past, like there were kids that were acting out because there was some kind of trauma that either happened to them or is currently happening to them, and you want to investigate that so that you'd be able to help that child. It's not really even about making an excuse for them. It's really about figuring out what's really wrong rather than just punishing them, right? Like,
right, sure.
But like, so they still probably need a punishment to help them correct their behaviors, but you also probably want to also provide counseling if there is some kind of trauma or abuse happening in their life. So that's I think what trauma informed is supposed to be. But but now they've widened it and broadened it so much that to the point where they're calling everything trauma. Or if you just spent too much time with your mom, it nags you, that's trauma. Or whatever, like it's, I don't know what they're calling trauma nowadays, but it's like
Well,
pretty much everything.
I'll tell you, the kinds of things that will be called trauma, that was one example, like the parents are, whatever. But there's also things like somebody around you is dieting and you're overweight and
Oh,
they
yeah.
mention that they lost a pound, and that is traumatizing you. That's triggering to you to hear that they lost a pound and you are overweight, and they shouldn't talk about that because that's like oppressing you, or that's fat phobic or whatever. So what I see, this weaponization of I guess empathy, or just using psych speak to control people's speech first and foremost, and then secondarily their behavior, seems epidemic, where we're teaching kids that if you feel discomfort, that is someone else's problem to fix.
Right.
So if you feel any kind of emotional discomfort, it was probably caused by someone else. Identify the someone else and the thing that you claim caused your discomfort, and then that person has to solve it, which is entirely backwards from, first of all, anything that I would think good therapists teach you to do, which is, typically that almost always people, even people being mean to you, that's their stuff. Like, that's good therapists, at least ones I've had, have told me, these people who are saying these things to you and they want you to believe bad things about yourself, that's their issue talking. Like, think of it as whatever's going on with them, that it is their problem to deal with. It's coming out onto you. Don't own it. Like, don't take that on as real. That's not, you don't have to do that
Yeah,
just
what you're
because someone
saying
says
is
it.
it's the opposite, because I mean, years ago when I was, earlier in the field, like learning how to work with, teach someone what their triggers are before
Yeah. Yeah.
before everybody's using the word trigger in
Yeah.
every other sentence. That was meant for you to have insight on what you're feeling, what's bringing up feelings for you, so that
Yes.
you could correct yourself. And actually, the way trauma was treated in the past is you do some form of what they call exposure therapy, where you
Yeah.
actually expose yourself to the thing that upsets you so that it doesn't upset you quite as much, and you kind of
Yeah.
you can get used to it. You can get some resilience for that thing. Like, for
Right.
example, if you were in a car accident and you go to that corner where the accident happened and you get emotional reaction, or you even maybe get a physiological reaction, sometimes the therapy should be to actually continue to visit that corner several times and maybe have a positive experience at that corner, like, so you're no longer only associating it with that car accident, rather than always avoiding it, or telling people that you
Yeah.
can't ever go to, you're not allowed to go there with me because I'm upset there.
Right.
Maybe a better example would be like a restaurant where someone broke up with you there, right? So it's like, you don't want to go there because someone broke up with you.
Right.
And if if it's an important restaurant or place you want to go to, you would learn to go to that restaurant and have a new
Right.
experience there, so it's no longer connected to the negative experience, rather than tell all of your friends, we can no longer ever go to that restaurant again, right? So
Right.
that's what you
Exactly.
would learn to do. You would actually learn how to expose yourself to that like stimulus, so that you can handle it. Of course, if it's not something that's harming you in the moment, if it's just something that's more internal, that then you would learn how to handle that, so that you don't blow up, so you don't have a fit of rage, or you don't disassociate, or you don't fall into like a deep depression in the moment, and that takes work. That's what the therapy was supposed to be. When you identify your trigger, you're identifying it so that you can work on it yourself, not so someone
Yeah.
else changes their behavior. You learn how to
Right.
manage that. You need how to be resilient around those things.
Right. And that is exactly the opposite of what's happening now.
Exactly. I know.
They're
And like, I think
having
college
more,
really changed that.
yeah, speech
The safe
codes,
spaces. Yeah.
safe spaces, and then of course getting down into the lower grades, where we now have the Stop It app, where kids have an app on their phone and they can literally report people for saying mean words and stuff, and they can just instantly report it. Now, what proof is
Really?
there
I
of
don't
that?
even know about
Oh,
this.
oh yeah, there's an app. It's
Oh
called
god.
Stop It, for it's supposed to be preventing bullying, and the kids download it on their phones, and they can make a report, and they're different drop down, like, or I don't know if it's drop down or whatever. Is it like, what are you reporting? Is it, hate speech? Is it a bully? Is it an attack? Right? Like, it has different categories. And I made a video about it, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And I think I called it like mouse, the like, woke's little red army has has its own app or something like that. It was,
Wow.
but it's incredibly dangerous and damaging in my opinion, because what it feels to me like we're doing, in addition to deputizing children to solve adult problems or to take their leadership role and be counselors, be reporters, be enforcers, be all the things that adults are supposed to be doing in that environment,
Mhm.
but we're empowering bullies and
Yes.
narcissists and attention seekers, and we're leaving the kids who are truly troubled, truly vulnerable, and we're not just leaving them, we're feeding them to the dogs, it feels
Yeah.
like to me.
Well, then also, like, they're tiptoeing around each other, and how are you supposed to
Yeah,
connect with people if you know you're gonna be reported on an app? Like, how are you supposed to how are you supposed to actually feel safe? When everything's about emotional safety, how are you supposed to feel safe if you know that you're about to get reported for just saying something by accident? I mean, that
right,
that doesn't build good friendships, and no wonder kids are having so many social skills issues and feeling so alone and so isolated because
right.
that's the environment that's being created for them.
And how much easier is it to hide behind a screen
Yeah,
and like sort of be yourself here, because like, well, they can't really touch you, and especially if you think about things like Snapchat, where like it disappears, it disappears, it disappears, it
mhm,
disappears. So it's, I say what I want to say, boom, it's gone. Like it, there's that too, where you have these conversations that there's barely a memory of the conversation. There's certainly, you don't get the sense of the person's facial expression. It's not in writing that you can hold on to it. We used to have letters. It's just these
yeah,
momentary, like I said something, you said something, and it's all gone into the ether. But I think it makes them bolder than they otherwise would be, while at the same time allowing them to hide.
for sure.
It's so strange, but
When they're not really
um
connecting. Yeah.
no, none of it is a real kind of intimacy, and I'm not talking about, sexual. I'm talking about emotional
Just
intimacy,
friendships. Yeah.
friendship, where you really feel like you can count on someone, where you stand with them, and I think most importantly, that if we get in an argument or something doesn't go right, like we'll be able to work it out.
Right.
I'm seeing children, and all the way up until young adults, really struggle with conflict resolution. And it
Yeah.
seems to me like the approach it's being used in the schools is, so it's like how they teach kids to write. Here's how you're going to write. There's going to be a topic sentence. There'll be three little examples. And then you're going to have a concluding sentence. And so kids go and treat it like a plug and play situation.
Right.
So they go looking for, here's an example. Is it a good one? I don't know. It's an example, like, so they take this formulaic approach. Well, they're doing the same thing. I've seen some of the conflict resolution lessons, and
Oh
it's really
gosh.
similar. It's, it's, I've seen DBT, right? Which is one kind of method for talking, for sort of having difficult conversations and, with people, but there are other methods. It's not anything like that. It's a whole lot of subjugating yourself to the
Right.
needs of the other, and on a like with rules. So, where is the other in the power and privilege scale
Yeah.
relative to you?
Ugh.
So that
Yeah.
changes the dynamic of the conflict. So if you're conflicted with somebody where you're not on the same level of power and privilege, then by definition, the person with the most power and privilege is more wrong.
Yeah, yeah, how is that how are these kids supposed to actually connect with that mentality? There's no way. I mean, that's why the critical race theory is just so sad
Yeah.
because they're pitting them against each other and they're making like white kids tiptoe around black kids and black kids be entitled or maybe even not believe in it and be upset that their white friends are looking at them differently. I mean, all of that is just it's just all damaging, and
Yeah.
I think that's why all of these kids are struggling. I mean, there's so many different elements to it.
Right.
But no,
We come full circle, right? Texas Sheep Lady is like wearing the masks.
yes, exactly.
It
It's
absolutely
exactly.
is. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. You can come in if you
Um,
want. So yes, I do. We're almost finished. I have my teenage daughter. I promised that I would take her to Sweet Frog to get some yogurt. So
ooh, okay.
a
You guys should
bonding moment,
go.
for family, like you've been advising.
Yes.
So,
And the
before we
light's
do, real
gotten
quick,
really weird here too.
I
People are
know, but
watching.
real quick, and I appreciate that you spent so much time talking to us. This was really fun and informative. I want to make sure that we have covered the stuff that we said we were going to cover. I did have a list, and I want to make sure that we went through. So we
I
did
don't
talk
remember
about,
now.
well, we talked about school counselors being horrible, basically, that they're just
Yeah.
violating boundaries. Parental rights, we didn't really get too into that, but I think it's implied that, when school counselors are replacing the family, right? Then
Mhm.
we're parental rights. How wrong our mental health system is. Any last thing you want to say about that
I
specifically?
mean, I just unfortunately what I've noticed is just the institutions of mental health have been captured so badly by the activists
Yeah,
that I don't want to discourage people from ever going to therapy, but I'd say tread with caution. And I think there are people, probably more traditional conservatives, or maybe people who
right.
are more religious, would say like counseling and therapy is bad all around, was always bad. But I don't agree with that worldview. I mean, I think a lot of people have really benefited from mental health treatment and
Sure.
have gotten better. And there are people who really do need it. Not everyone's just being
Yeah.
like a
Sure.
whiny person on TikTok.
Oh yeah.
And there are
Full
people who really need
disclosure, I'll be the
it.
first one to say, like, in my 20s, I was one of those kids that, like, school was a haven for me, and I loved it, and I knew how to do school, and I knew how to do, I mean, I didn't love my peers, but I loved the, like, learning and the grades and all the attaboy, all that, and being on a soccer team and all the opportunities to perform and be, accepted by the grown-ups as doing the right thing, being a good kid. And then I got out in the world, and there's no attaboys. There's no grades. There's
Right.
no constant, like, "You're doing great. Good job." Eh, it's just another day, and it's not paradise, and there's problems, and, I come out in a recession, whatever, so it was bad. I mean, I went through my 20s, and I was like, "This is not at all what I thought it was gonna be." I don't know what I thought it was gonna be, but I didn't think it was gonna be the slog that it was, and I got pretty depressed. That coupled with, the loss of a family member to cancer, like the two things combined, and I was really depressed. And so I ended up with cognitive behavioral therapy because like it just, I wasn't feeling better and I wasn't feeling better. And what it turned out I was doing was like this like rumination thing where you
Mm.
like run over all the
Yeah.
bad things.
Mhm.
And it helped immeasurably. It was amazing. And somebody
Good.
commented earlier, could they even do it these days? It was one of the questions that come up. Can we even do cognitive behavioral therapy anymore? Because it requires, here it is. Um, I wonder if we could even use cognitive behavioral therapy anymore in the schools,
Because you need
considering
to be
some of,
in truth for it. You need to actually it's about reality, right? It's about,
yeah,
what cognitive behavioral you know this about it's about looking at your cognitive distortions. It's not about taking what you feel as the plain, truth. Your feelings are valid, but they don't mean that what's happening is actually the truth. So you need to tease that out and then, learn
that's right.
figure out what are your cognitive
It's more important, like,
distortions.
why are you having the feeling that you're feeling? Then, like, let's just accept it. It's another
Yeah,
fact to
your
consider.
truth.
Yeah. Your truth, right? Exactly. So then I just want to make sure there was something else. Another person asked what you thought the long-term effects would have be on children. I think at this point in the conversation we were talking
Oh,
about the
about
damage done by
COVID
the,
stuff?
yes, uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that I can't really answer that specifically, but I'll just say they're really bad. Um, I mean, watching the weird light is weird. Watching
It's like,
the watching the it all unfold, it was like watching a train crash, right? Like
mhm.
a
Yeah,
slow-moving
that's,
train crash. So it was so upsetting to be like, this is we're gonna be feeling this for generations.
yeah,
I
for
mean, I
sure.
really believe that. The effects are like we said earlier. I think there's huge division. It's already there. I think this trans thing is a fallout. It has I mean, it was the seeds were planted, or it didn't just start after COVID, but it really exploded after COVID. And I think there's a connection to that the seeds were
Yeah,
planted then and now it's exploded. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that kids were stuck on their screens during that era, that are more isolated. Kids don't know how to relate to each other, that they are
right.
more divided from their families. So I think that that's all related. I think it's just this general like Marxism stuff, like that's affecting, all around.
Right. And that was
So
echoed here. Paul said the insistence that mental health involves the acceptance of things that children know to be untrue must have horrific
yes, I
effects
mean,
on
it
their
makes
limbic
us all
system.
crazy. Like when we know, like kids need to be grounded in truth. The kids need to like kids developmentally, like they need categories, right? They need to know, like that's a tire, that's a truck, like that's
Yep.
and that makes them feel safe when like the adults like, yeah, that's what color is that? That's red, and you just do that, right? If you showed me that video where they were like making them say the
Yeah.
colors were different than they actually were, and their
It's
heads were
the red
exploding.
square, but it's, like,
Yeah, it's like,
it's not.
no, that's really bad for them. So they
Yeah.
and at least there they were like acknowledging that what they were saying wasn't true. So it's a little bit different, but still like not a good exercise.
But they were
But
still
like,
telling them to overcome their brain. They were saying, like, "What did you have to do to say the right
yeah,
thing?" They were literally putting it that way, to say the right thing.
to
And
like
it's
not think for themselves, really,
exactly.
not
Then
and
there
not
was,
believe in themselves.
Paul also said, "Is there some hope in the tendency in children at a certain age to reject their teachers and rules on principle, or is that one of the reasons for the attacks on puberty?"
Huh. I mean, yeah, I think the goal here is to get a lot of subservient kids, right? I think we have really demoralized like a generation with this COVID thing. I think they feel like the world is out of control. The climate change thing, we didn't even talk about that. Like that, a lot of them don't even believe they're going to have a future with these narratives. If you watch CNN for like a minute, you'd feel
Right.
the doom. And so I think the goal is, yeah, that they're trying to get a mass amount of kids to be
Right.
demoralized, to not fight for themselves, to not think that they can do it, to not be entrepreneurs and self starters, and the rule followers. And we're
Exactly.
we're obviously there are gonna be kids that are gonna rebel, like you said, in those different categories. But I think the goal is to get a lot of kids that
Yeah.
are gonna just follow the rules and be demoralized and be more easily
Yeah.
controlled. We've got kids that are more medicated and on these hormones and all that. They're unfortunately they're going to be struggling with their health, and they're going to be struggling with their mental health and their physical health, and then they're going to be more controlled. They're going to be more vulnerable. When I lived for 3.5 years with like serious physical um, physical issues, then that made me honestly a much more vulnerable. I could be more controlled. It was harder for me, now that I'm a little more physically able to do things, like
Right.
it's easier for me to say no way, I'm not doing
Yeah.
that. So
Exactly.
I think that's what they're doing with all of this, is they're trying to just get a bunch of kids that are just more easily controlled,
Yeah. Well, I would
unfortunately.
agree. I cannot thank you enough. This was super interesting and really helpful, and I hope that people watching got a lot out of it. I hope that people will continue to watch or listen on podcast will get a lot out of this in terms of rethinking what is and is not appropriate to be done at all with children, and certainly in the school environment. And I hope that parents, hearing what Pam has to say, will be more confident asserting themselves and taking back the rightful place as the guardians of their children's mental well-being, because
Trust
really it is.
yourself.
Yes, please do that. That is very important. Even if all you have is doubt and skepticism, that's a start. Just get them away from the people who claim to be certain about these things, because even, right, Pam, even you're not certain when it comes to dealing with children. It takes time, it takes the proper approach, and that's not what they're doing. They're having a formulaic, out of the box, this is what we're going to do. And it's, don't let them do it. It'd be my final thing. Any final sentence?
Yeah, I mean, my I guess my message in general to parents and families is to never blindly, I think your audience does this anyway, but never blindly trust experts, to question things. If something doesn't feel right or something doesn't sit right, stop and really look at it, and don't let someone convince you otherwise. A
Yeah.
therapist, unfortunately, they are quite masterful at making you feel like, because they are actually really good at being nice and sweet and kind, and then you feel like, oh well, maybe I was wrong about that. Well, don't hang on to that, and don't let them intimidate you. So just trust yourself.
Exactly. Agreed. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody in the audience. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Please like, share, and subscribe. And also go check out Pam's website, The Truthful Therapist. And she's got a LinkedIn as well. And you can learn
At
more about her
work.
work. .org. Thank you.
Yeah.
And also her Instagram is fantastic. She does amazing reels. And you were part of a film. Tell us the name of the film that
Yeah,
you
I'm
did.
actually in a few films, but the
Oh,
latest
yeah.
one Did you know that?
I
You're
did. I
a
thought there were
movie
like 2.
star, woo!
I thought there were 2, but there's more than 2?
There are 3.
There's 3. Okay. Tell us the names of the
Um,
movies.
the one I'd say that the latest one is, probably my favorite because it has, like, it's a docudrama, so they actually use actors to really bring you in emotionally to the story.
Okay.
So and that's called Gender Transformation. You can find that on gendertransformation.com. It was actually produced by the Epic Times, but it's an independent Swedish filmmaker, so he's really not political. I mean, in terms of like Democrat, Republican, he's just a Swedish guy that watched the trans the debate kind of go down in his country, and what
Right.
changed people's minds there was a documentary called, I think, Trans Train that they did in Sweden, and that shifted all of their policies. So he was inspired by that, and he did a wonderful film where he told the story of a woman named Abigail Martinez and her daughter, who
I know
unfortunately
that
had
story.
yeah,
Yaley.
Yali, yeah. So yeah, Yali had an unfortunately tragic ending, and it really talks about how the schools indoctrinated Yali, and she was exposed to a groomer family that kind of gave her a script to get to in with the state of California, and the state of California separated that family, and unfortunately, yeah, Ellie did kill herself, and it's a really tragic story. But the film is really powerful, and I'm interviewed in it talking about my experience as a school counselor, and how counselors really are manipulated to carry out this agenda. A parent named Erin Friday, a mom, she's in it. She talks about how parents are being turned against their parent, or their children are being turned against them. So there's all these different experts in it, and it's a docudrama. It's gendertransformation.com. And then the other one, it's a little more religious. I'll just talk about those two, and it's called Disconnected. Did you see that one?
I did
Disconnected.
not.
And that
Disconnected.
one is also really well done. It has more of a Christian bend to it. At the end, it gets a little more spiritual. So for those that maybe aren't religious, they might not connect to it as much. If you are religious, then you might actually connect to it more. I think it's really well done. And it tells the story of this detransitioner. Her name is Daisy, and it actually has a really hopeful ending. I'll just give it away, that she ends up getting pregnant and having a baby, and it's really beautiful after 5 years of being on testosterone
Oh,
and
wow.
everything. And so that's a really good film. Both of them are really informative about the agenda and like what's really behind this trans movement, and the people that are more vulnerable to it, and why they might be
Sure.
gravitating towards it. And both of them don't have like a blaming, angry tone. They're really more educational and about storytelling. So
Cool.
Disconnected and Gender Transformation.
Yay. Well, I'm gonna check both of those out. I mean, I've seen the trailer for Gender Transformation, and I mean, I'm like, it gets me really
It
here.
makes you cry. I'm under this
It
red
does.
umbrella, so I look like a freak right
No,
now.
no, that's okay. All right. Thank you so, so much. This was so great. Thank you for doing it. And again, thanks to everybody. We will see you next time.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.